welcome everyone. I want to welcome our guest, Tiffany Foo, who is not only is a director of talent at Kapor Capital, which is a venture capital firm that invested in companies like Uber, Career Karma, and many others. But she also has a lot of experience working in human resources at different tech companies. And the reason we asked her to come and speak to all of you is she's actually super passionate about creating pathways for people who are outside of tech. So they have the best advice, the best guidance, how to overcome uh, things like imposter syndrome when you're going into your coding interviews. How do you navigate the job search space? So we invited her, and on this call tonight, we're gonna dive a lot into her experience, but also the actionable strategies, any advice that she has for all of you. But before we begin, let me just say welcome, Tiffany. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody. I was on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, Tiffany, and we always kick off these AMAs with asking our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves. Um,
Mm.
kind of like, what did you do before you got into tech? What are your passions? How did you end up now being in a position where you're helping companies like Career Karma uh, figure out how to hire the best talent?
Sure. So my background's also untraditional. I started as a teacher, and then I became a energy worker and a massage therapist, and I was actually going to school to become a therapist when I pivoted and decided I didn't want to be stuck in a room all day working one-on-one with clients, and that for me the biggest impact I could make would be to work at the organizational level and think about an organization with all of its different pieces and parts and groups as a single client, if you will. And I would say my career is a series of both fortunate happenstance as well as really connecting to the right people. Because so when I finished grad school with a degree that did not give me any actual career trajectory, I was lucky enough to get swooped into this small boutique organizational development firm that was focused on building teams, especially in startup environments. And from there, I got my first startup gig where I had no experience actually doing the HR side of the house, but someone let me do it anyways. And I became the director of people for my first startup, which went from 20 people to 125 people over 3.5 years. And I was the one who mainly interviewed, recruited, and then grew and developed and engaged all of the employee base onwards. And so fast forward to now, since then, I've been director of people in 4 different startups spanning healthcare, SaaS productivity tools, biotech, and fintech. And now I find myself at Kapor on the other side of startup, on the venture side, serving a portfolio of 120 different social mission-driven companies, Career Karma being one of them. And for me, the juice is really about, since I don't know how I got into tech, it kind of just happened. This was not the goal, this was not the plan. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be where I am and in the position to really be a gatekeeper and help demystify, if you will, some of the startup mystique and to help clarify some of the assumptions we all have about startups and what it takes to be startup ready, or is a startup even the right path for me? Um, and so I'm here to really break down both the challenges as well as the opportunity of startup and be really real about the barriers to entry, specifically as emerging talent into the startup world versus taking a different path to a much larger company, if you will. And I'll stop there for now.
Tiffany, I didn't realize that you were a teacher when you first started your career. So thanks a lot for sharing that. We have a lot of teachers, music teachers, math teachers in our community too, um, who are trying to build on top of the experience they previously had and now transitioning those skills into a role in tech. Courtney is an elementary teacher on here. Courtney, thanks a lot for your hard work. Um, Tiffany, you mentioned that there were connections. There were connections that part of your journey was kind of you got lucky at the right in the right place at the right time. Others was meeting people and connecting to people. Um, can you expand on that a little more? Why is it important for people to kind of put themselves out there, putting themselves outside their comfort zone to meet others if they're trying to pivot careers?
So first of all, start by saying that I am an introvert, even though my entire job is really talking to people all day long. And I'm fine as long as there's a clear agenda, but when it comes down to networking or just sharing with others, like who I am, what I do, why I hate that. That is my least favorite thing in the world. And so for me, it's really hard to make those small talk conversations and then to focus on the what have I done. That's the least favorite. That's the most uninteresting thing I could think about to talk about, and that's not what I care about when I talk to other people as well. But in terms of relationships, so how did I get into my first startup? I literally applied to a Craigslist ad back in 2011, and it was a very ambiguous job that was sort of be both help with recruiting as well as be the office manager as well as support all of these other HR related functions. And then there was even some client facing things. So it was truly a generalist role. And I did that because I wasn't really clear on what else I should have been doing, except for I knew I was interested in startups and I needed an entry point somewhere. And my degree was not going to help me get anywhere with that because it was not a technical degree. And so from there, I really focused on building the rapport with that first hiring manager. And I think that's really key, is to identify the one person in the organization who is going to vouch for you, who's going to believe in you, who's you're going to develop that rapport with so that they think, oh, this is a person who we would want to have on our team. And I think that this advice really has applied throughout my roles. And for me, it's finding that initial in, and it's targeting all of my energy towards one particular person in an organization, usually someone who has decision-making power, if at all possible, and then having them amplify my, I guess, be a
Like an
credibility.
advocate,
Yes,
or a champion. Yeah, yeah. Uh, Tiffany, can you tell people, and I'm sure our community will ask you a lot of questions, but one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you to speak to our community is to kind of get the perspective of what does hiring look like from the employer side, because from the employee side, you might feel like, well, there's so many people applying for these jobs, it must be easy to be an employer. You just like find the right candidate. You just go through all the resumes. But what does it look like if you're, let's say, a startup, maybe you have 50 people or 100 people, you're trying to hire 2 or 3 engineers. What does that process look like for that company in order to actually get those hires? And maybe even how much money does it even take for them to recruit, to kind of pay for the recruiting services?
Sure. So many different questions there. Please remind me
Yeah.
if I forget one of them, but we'll start with just the perspective. So from the company perspective, it either goes two ways, and it depends on how much of a well-known brand name entity it is. So obviously, the highly recognized companies like the Facebooks, the Googles, the Ubers of the world, even the Twilios of the world, they can just rely on inbound and they will have solid inbound. But for smaller companies without that brand name recognition, in the 50 to plus range, they are struggling because in a given week, on average, maybe they are receiving 3 to 10 inbound applications. And out of those 10 applications, probably only one, maybe two of them are actually qualified leads, as in candidates who have the right background, the right skill set, and candidates who the company would want to talk to. So it is a very dry market out there. And so for these companies without brand recognition, another thing you have to think or to be aware of is they don't have the same type of recruiting infrastructure or resources available. There may be one in a 50-person organization, there may be one or two recruiters. And that's if the company's lucky. There may only be one person, and this person may own both the human resources side as well as the recruiting side. And so they don't have the luxury of an entire team to help support all of the sourcing, the interviewing, the vetting of candidates. And also, as you can see, the supply and demand is there. So there's not enough volume in terms of resumes for there to be a bigger team at that level. In addition, the struggle is really about finding qualified candidates. And so a lot of the time is spent on cold outbounds and specifically on sourcing. So there's a few different ways that companies can approach this. If they're desperate or they have the means, they will hire contingency recruiters. So these are third-party recruiting firms whose sole focus is really building out top of the funnel pipelines. And I would say at that level, candidate experience is low, tailored search is low. And so what these people do is they just send out endless emails, make endless phone calls using LinkedIn and other social profiles to try to engage with candidates. And for the most part, these candidates already have jobs. So they're trying to catch candidates who are not per se on the job market right now. And so on that end, a recruiter could send over 100 cold outbound messages in a given day to a broad group of potential candidates. And out of that, they're probably going to get, maybe if they're lucky, 5 responses. And this is because of the generic nature of their outbound messages, number one. And it's also because highly talented engineers are desensitized to all of these constant messages, these constant, I guess, engagements. And so oftentimes they're blocked, oftentimes there's completely no response. So from there, then these third-party recruiters let's talk about what they charge. So third-party recruiters on average charge about 20% a base salary of whomever they hire. So if the a starting salary is $90,000, do the math. So it could cost, a single placement could cost a company anywhere between $15,000 to $20,000, $30,000. And that's really expensive for a single candidate. And that's a huge amount of and also this takes on average over I would say a month and a half to longer to go through an entire cycle of getting a qualified lead and taking that candidate all the way through an interview process, because there's the spin up portion where they're just sourcing, then it's getting actual leads all the way through the interview cycle. And so that's really expensive. And a lot of companies don't, especially startup companies who may not even be pre-revenue or who may not be post-revenue, so they may not make any money yet. And that's really expensive, and that's a high lift and a big expense for a company. But they do this because they're not able to source candidates on their own. Other companies who may have a recruiter on site will spend maybe $8,000 or $9,000 on like a hire tool or on an Intello, which is a sourcing engine that basically is scraping data from social profiles to uncover email addresses for potential leads. And so that's a less expensive way, but it's also a high lift because you're constantly running these machine learning searches to try and uncover emails. And that, I would say, and then send email campaigns, automated email campaigns through these sites to see if anyone will then respond and bite. And personally, I've had representing a single company which doesn't have brand name recognition, I've had minimal success on that front. And I would say if I send upwards of 50 emails per campaign to candidates, I will get maybe 5 responses total. And so I guess what I'm trying to illustrate overall for this is that these companies have a really hard time, number one, identifying qualified candidates, but number two, engaging with these candidates. And another thing I'll add is in terms of posting. So posting a job is also kind of expensive. On LinkedIn, posting a single job is almost $400 or sometimes even over $400. Posting a job on Indeed is about $300. There are very few places where it is free to post a job. And so companies with minimal funds are also trying to determine where they should spend their resources, limited as they are, to get the most or to make the most outreach across the board and to actually target the types of candidates that they're looking for. So these are all some of the sourcing challenges up front.
Yeah, and I think I think this was a great overview because we're kind of like living in a world right now where on one hand you have the companies, and like Tiffany just described, it's expensive. They probably don't have a dedicated person who is in charge of it, and from a company standpoint, they want to hire the most senior person they can hire, right?
Yes.
From the candidate who's outside of tech, right? You're like, I want to just work for any company, and you're kind of you need to signal and portray yourself as someone who has enough experience for this company to kind of say like, okay, we're not gonna get the most senior candidate because they probably already have jobs, right? And that's the reality of the job market, is that a lot of companies already, like a lot of engineers already who have experience, work for existing companies. But there is a huge demand for all kinds of companies to hire more engineers. And now companies need to make almost like exceptions to their own process, because otherwise those positions are going to be unfilled. And so the reason we also wanted to bring Tiffany here is to share with you, like, what can someone do, take into the consideration like the current market. Tiffany, what can someone do who is now like graduating from a coding bootcamp in order to increase their chances of getting hired at either a small startup, a mid-tier, or a larger tech company?
So a few things. And just really quickly, I see Valerie left a response. So if Valerie said, so if you're trying to break into tech through small startups and you have a family and need benefits, it's probably not a good route. Generally speaking, I would say yes. Number one, because of the risk of the startup failing overall. Most startups especially at the early stage, don't go past 2 years. So if you are looking for stability and you are looking for a longer term gig, then probably startup is not the best fit for you, especially since Series C or seed series companies or Series A companies will probably pay you less than a public company or a much larger company would. And then I see View also said, so discoverability is a problem that companies have prior to hiring a candidate. Yes, that is very true. It's very much from the perspective of a recruiter, it feels like there's a scarcity of candidates and that everyone is competing for the same candidates who are already working at jobs that they may be quite comfortable in. Hopefully that answers that.
Yeah. Can I also add to Valerie's question? So what you also have to realize, Valerie, is that there is like the problems we're discussing for startups or maybe larger tech startups, those exist for companies that many people may not perceive as like tech companies. Like Wells Fargo is a huge company that does pay benefits, and people may not think of them as like they're a tech company, but they have a lot of engineers, right? And we've had people from the like Chase Bank, and we had people from like BlackRock, and those people hire thousands of engineers. So it really comes down to like, once you have a portfolio, once you have the skills, you get to decide, do you want to apply to a larger tech company or a larger finance company that needs tech talent, or do you go the startups route?
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add for parents out there. So if a company has less than 50 people, they do not need to do anything about parental leave. And so smaller startups are less likely to have any sort of, because they don't need to from a legal perspective, do not often have any sort of parental leave, and definitely not paid parental leave in place. Outside of San Francisco, which has different laws, so companies with over 20 people, there will be paid parental leave at a minimum. But so that's another thing to think about.
Yeah. Tiffany, I think this is a perfect segue to open it up for the community. Oh yeah, Don said, so how can bootcamp grads increase their chances of getting hired?
Okay, sorry, going back to that. So first, just going the resume route is probably not, that's not what I would recommend. I would say first, making a direct connection with someone within the organization. So I would first do my homework to determine what type of startup am I targeting. First, understanding the size of the startup is important, recognizing that early stage startups will have probably no benefits in place. And so if you are targeting a startup, to think about the 50 plus person or employee range to get, because they will have benefits and they'll probably have more infrastructure and policies in place. But then beyond that, then to find and to do reach outs to existing team members at that startup on the engineering team, and to see if any of those people would be willing to either have a coffee with you or just meet up or have an informal video chat with you to learn more about the company. And I would approach it again more like an informational interview. And then at the very end of the informational interview, ask if they know if the company is hiring anytime soon, or allude to an open position you saw in the company. And having someone within the company vouch for you is huge, especially if you have a minimal resume on the engineering front up front. Because internally on the company side, many companies have employee referral bonus programs. And that means that employees get a bonus for referring qualified leads to open jobs. And this is useful because it's a win-win situation. So you're helping someone get a bonus and they're helping you get an in, because when someone refers you into the organization, usually if you're qualified, at least on paper, with the base minimums, you're going to immediately get considered at least for that first initial phone screen bet. And that's, I think, an easier route than just endlessly sending out resumes to startups.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say is reaching out directly to hiring managers could also be useful. For me, if there's a short but compelling cover or letter of introduction, that usually I take the time to read that. On average, recruiters spend less than 6 seconds looking at a single resume. So if nothing pops out immediately as, yes, this sounds like a match, then that resume is just going to get moved to the discard pile pretty quickly.
Yeah, Tiffany, and I'm so glad that these words are coming from you, because we started doing a job search workshop where we actually had David Harris join and do like these type of workshops. But he's someone who has gone through coding bootcamp, and he compared the results of sending out warm emails. They're cold emails, but they're warm because they're personalized, versus applying online. And he was seeing an enormous success and a huge like response rate when he actually found the person at a company, whether they were a hiring manager, the founders, and wrote them a personal note with that email. How many people were on the job search workshop on Sunday? So I see Haja was on there. I'm going to drop the link in the chat in case people want to join in on the next one. He actually agreed to do the workshops every single Sunday. And we have the first 2 parts recorded. And this weekend, he's actually going to break down the process of writing the email and how do you find the email and how do you find the people. So make sure to join that workshop. I think this is a perfect segue. We have about 30 minutes to open up for questions. I will say for our community members, please introduce yourself to Tiffany and mention maybe what role you're looking for in tech and a little bit about yourself.
And I also see there's 3 more questions in the chat box. So I'm not sure if we want to weave those into this conversation as well.
Yeah, let's see if anyone wants to ask the questions live, and then we'll take the questions in the chat. But we'll make sure that all the questions get answered.
Hi, Tiffany. Thank you again for coming. I completely relate to, the whole, what you mentioned in the beginning about being introverted, but, being in a position where you have to speak a lot. And, it's just it's a skill, I guess, you develop. But I just wanted to bring up the point that you mentioned also about the recruiters feeling like there's a scarcity. I've always sort of felt on my end as the candidate, like it's rude to reach out and send messages and say, like I would be amongst, millions of people sending messages to this person, and it would be annoying. So I did hear on the, workshop that actually that would be a good thing, like it would be perceived well.
Agreed. And so especially if we're talking about those smaller companies who don't have brand recognition, sending a warm email that sort of lays out the groundwork for why you want this role, not just want to be an engineer, but why you want to work for this company specifically is huge. Why the mission matters to you, and then tie that, and then the resume, that's huge to me. And I do take the time to look at those. I would also say that, yes, inbound is exciting to companies where they are only getting 10 new resumes a week. So personalize. This is your opportunity to really share with a company why you want to work for them. And I can't stress enough the importance of personalization and taking the time to, number one, understand how big the engineering team is and to speak to the specific values of the company.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tiffany, can you address the topic? I think Try asked, in terms of having degrees, like bachelor degrees or master degrees, how does that impact your ability to get hired? And are you at a disadvantage if you don't have one? And like, how big of, can you still overcome that disadvantage? And would that impact your pay in any way?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So it depends on the organization. There are some organizations that really do privilege certain types of education or certain types of schools, and you probably don't want to work at those organizations. There are other organizations who really don't care about that. And so maybe from a discovery perspective, what you can do is research who is currently at these organizations. And you look at their LinkedIn. Did they come from a boot? And see some members of their engineering team. Did they come from a boot camp? Or are they all CS majors from, if you're in the area, from Berkeley or from Stanford or MIT or wherever it is? And because if a company has hired someone from a boot camp before and that has been a successful hire, they are so much more likely to hire another boot camp graduate again. Because this is basically proof of concept, if you will. And I would reach out directly to that bootcamp grad and see if you can do that informational interview with them and see how their learning curve was or how it was for them to, how they onboarded and ramped up into that company and get more information that way.
Hey, Tiffany.
Thanks, Tiffany.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm Raina. I found Career Karma this past summer, and Career Karma introduced me to Kinsey, where I am studying user experience design. I'm very grateful. I'm very excited. And my background is banking and finance. And I discovered Career Karma on Twitter, and then it just blossomed from there. So with a background in banking and finance, I used to work as a bank manager in India till my job was left over there. So I decided I needed to retool and ride the wave. Now that my resume has that type of experience and I'm learning user experience design and I'm doing side projects on my own, how can I position myself to be an efficient and effective designer? Because that's what I want to do.
All right. So first, I would say to target fintech specific companies because this is leveraging your previous background in finance and it's adding on top of that your new UX UI skills. And so I would look at all of the fintech companies in the area and then really craft a cover letter that speaks to how you understand this particular client or user base, and you've also had the unfortune of working with really janky, system, because most financial service systems are pretty janky and not quite user friendly, and really craft a cover letter that speaks to that. And then, of course, tie that to some sort of informational interview if you can with that company. And I think that would be a good a good entry point for you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Raina, I love your shirt, by the way. The 21-day challenge shirt. To everyone, shout out to everyone who did the challenge.
It keeps me inspired.
Thanks, Raina. Let's see. We have about 20 minutes.
I had a question.
Someone was going next. Yeah, jump in, George.
Tiffany, I'm just curious. Has anybody? Well, folks, I did finish the 21 challenge. My name is George. My second month at Lambda School studying data science. I'm just curious because I've always, I got a family and all that nature and security, and I get that nature. But regarding startups, has anybody reverse engineered in the sense of maybe wanting to go into VC and a workforce startup and went that route? I'm just curious.
Yes. So there's really only, unfortunately right now, as it stands, two paths into VC. And the first path is that traditional path, which is like the banker, investment banker path, where you need an MBA, blah, 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 and you need to have spent X number of years doing some sort of banking thing, probably out on Wall Street or one of the other big firms. But the other path is the startup path. And this is having, so this would either be being a senior level operator, so at the VP level as either VP of operations or VP of strategy and BD, and having been in a startup that has successfully grown through Series A, Series B, and either to an exit, some sort of exit. And VCs like that type of experience because then that person has the viewpoint of the new clients that we would be serving. And so understanding the startup ecosystem is a very different skill set than the investment banking ecosystem. And I think both are necessary to truly have a robust way of assessing new potential companies. And so that has been a successful route for Kapor specifically. We look at previous startup experience, not just MBA and investment banker experience. And I know that other VCs do as well. And you can push, especially if you get an in on the portfolio services side, which is the post-investment side. And that's helping because companies need more than just capital to grow and evolve. They need additional advisory services. And so choosing a vertical, whether that's like BD, growth marketing, or talent acquisition and culture, or the finance side, and then becoming sort of an SME for advisor for the entire portfolio. And that's definitely another way in.
Tiffany, on the topic of Kapor, can you talk a little bit about, I know some people are joining in and they may not have heard about what venture capitals do, and maybe talk about a little bit about like Kapor Capital, what the mission is, and also for people who are interested in getting a job in tech, why it's important for them to understand the ecosystem, the syntax, all those things as they're getting ramped up.
Sure. So startups need capital to exist. And so they need and oftentimes founders don't have enough of their own money or capital in order to fund their company or just at least spin it off the ground to the point where it can do an MVP version with a skeleton crew to then prove product market fit. So what happens is startups and founders turn to investors. And there's many different types of investors. I'm going to focus on venture because that's where I live right now. So VC is one way to get capital to help fund your initial startup. And VC takes equity in exchange for capital by providing capital. So the VC owns a specific portion of the company in the same way that employees get equity or stock options when they join startups. For Kapor Capital specifically, we're a little bit different because we're a social impact startup. And what that means is we do not prioritize profit over impact. We think they are mutually and equally as important as one. So you may have heard about triple bottom lines or double bottom lines. It's the same principle of we can care about impact, social, environmental, and we can also be profitable. So Kapor was founded by Mitch and Frida Kapor. Some of you may have heard of Lotus 123, the software spreadsheets. That was Mitch's first company back in the 80s. And so he's been deeply steeped in tech and startups for a really long time. And so we are a private VC in the sense that we do not take outside funding. All of our capital or all of our investment funds are from the Mitch and Frida Kapor's trust. So it's almost like a family business, which is slightly different than the traditional VC. And our primary objective is really about the diversification of tech, and as well as the democratization of access to tech. So we look at it at 3 different levels. And first, we're looking at who has access to capital or who receives venture capital funding. And as I'm sure you're aware, across the board, the majority of founders are white men. So for us, it's really important to diversify that pool of founders at the top, because our argument is that diversity must start at the top. And so a lot of companies talk about how diverse their companies are, but my volley would be, is this all levels, all roles, or are you just diverse with your regular staff? Are you diverse at the VP level? Are you diverse at the founder level? Are you diverse at the board level? And all studies show that most companies are not that diverse at the founder and at the board level. So that's where we start. And so right now, 59% of our companies have a founder who either identifies as a woman or a person from an underrepresented background. And then we can look one layer down to who has a job in tech, or who are all of these tech companies composed of, and look at those demographics as well. And that's where I operate. So I do a lot of work on the DEI front in terms of hiring and retention and growth for our portfolio companies' employees. But then last, we're looking at the level of the products and services. So who are these products and services being built for? And how are they making people's lives better? And how are they lowering barriers to access or opportunity? And so that's what makes us a social impact VC specifically. And that is what we measure and we focus. And that's how we consider whether we're going to invest in companies or not.
Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks a lot for your work and Kapor's work. And we're very fortunate to have Kapor Capital as one of our investors. In terms of you all giving money to startups, right, to build the product, but ultimately it's the people who build the product, right? And so for people who are looking to get kind of like an unfair edge in the job search, you mentioned look for companies that have hired bootcamp grads, right? Because they're more likely to hire other bootcamp grads. Would you advise people to look at, like, follow tech news and see which companies have raised funding? And based on the funding events, to kind of target those companies, because they're also probably about to start hiring more engineers, designers, and so on.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Looking for, so usually once a new round of funding closes, 1 month later, the floodgates open in terms of a bunch of new opportunities. And so going from a Series A company to a Series B company, on average, that could mean at least 20 to 30 to 40 open positions in that first year. And so that creates a lot of opportunity there.
And just along the same lines, so it sounds like maybe you don't need to wait to see the ad, for the position. You can just sort of approach the company and say, hey, I'm interested. And,
I would say yes, because so that makes you top of mind for when a future opportunity would present itself. And as I mentioned previously, it's really expensive to open a position. There's a lot of upfront upfront resources that go into it. So if a company can take a more convenient approach and already has warm leads, they're going to pursue those first.
Okay.
Also, companies are reviewing their existing talent pool. So if you previously applied maybe year one and you didn't have enough experience or the right experience and you didn't make it to the next round, companies are still looking at their existing talent pool. So maybe 6 months later, you have more experience, or you've built another app or worked on another project, and this adds more to your resume. I would say recircle with them or just check in the future. And there's a fine line between persistence and outright, I don't know, annoyance.
Right.
But I would actually support everyone in pursuing persistence, because recruiters are lazy, because given volume, given and also given the urgency in which these positions need to be filled, the people who keep showing up, who keep putting themselves forward, are going to at least have more consideration.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Tiffany. Let me see. We have about 10 minutes left because I want to be respectful of Tiffany's time and everyone who's on the East Coast staying up late, listening to the AMA. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I have one quick question. I don't know if you can hear me. Tiffany, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. How you doing? I'm Greg Jordan. I'm a Lambda student. I'm a finishing Lambda student soon, but I'm presently looking for work now, full stack development. I'm based in Atlanta, and I just recently moved to Atlanta from Philadelphia. And then based on the advice of Ruben and Timur and Artur, I have started to look at different tiers of companies. But one of the things that I'm finding out is that it's hard to find out who the hiring managers are, or who to send my emails to. I just came across a tool that was made aware to me by someone else from Career Karma, that existed from Career Karma, that'll help me find it. But now I need to know how to find the specific companies that I'm looking for. Not as far as industry is concerned, because as a full stack developer, I pretty much will work in any industry right now just to get started. And I'm specifically looking for entry-level junior positions, but I'm having a hard time targeting companies like Home Depot. You know, generally we look at Home Depot as a company that is for hardware and tools and so forth and so on. I just recently found out they have software engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I go about finding out which companies to target?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have the best answer for that. For me, it's always been more of less of a cast the widest net, and it's more been like, what do I care? I always go back to, what do I want to do? And I also get that simultaneously, if you're open to doing anything, this creates a challenge for figuring out how to target things. But for me, I would systematize your approach. So maybe 1 week you're focusing on all of the big box stores. So anything that's retail based, because yes, all of these big box stores have retail components, which have online shopping marketplaces. So maybe you focus on all of those retail stores in week 1 and look for jobs that are in Atlanta for those types of companies. And then maybe the next week you turn it around and look at a different type of sector. So maybe now you're looking at nonprofits or other or maybe municipal organizations that also have web pages and have some type of platform that they need to be able to engage with the community on. And then maybe next week you're looking at restaurants, because surprisingly a bunch of restaurants also have to have some sort of API at the very least to tie themselves to whichever food delivery system they are on. And
That's good that you mentioned that, because I have a background in cooking as well too, which is what I was going to ask you. How do I tie my background into software? But you just mentioned it, so thank you.
So, true story. One of my friends who was 39 when she was a yoga teacher, and she decided she wanted to be a software engineer. So 10 years ago, she started Dev Bootcamp when Dev Bootcamp still existed and was still an early stage thing. And her first job was at the Jelly Belly factory. Who would have thought the Jelly Belly factory had a web team? But they did. And that's how she got in the door. And she stuck it out for over a year to get that on her resume before she was even able to find another job that was more tech focused.
Okay.
And so there are many ways to do this. And if you are hungry enough and willing to just find something that will get your foot in the door and stick it out to build up a line on your resume that is really important to companies, then this is the launching pad and the step forward.
Thank you. I never thought about that approach. I'm definitely going to get into that right. I'm definitely going to get into that. Seriously.
Greg, and if you start typing like tech companies, food industry, there's a lot of even venture capitalists who invest in food related industries and businesses. And most of them need engineers. There's a lot of like on-demand delivery, like DoorDash. There's a lot of Blue Apron. All of those companies that have websites, they need engineers. And I think with your background as a chef, you can tie directly, and part of your story of why you're reaching out to them, it's not just you need a job. You can be like, well, I'm reaching out to you because I'm a former chef and I can bring that experience to what you're building now as an engineer. So it's all about tying that, kind of spinning your story in a way where it makes sense for why you're connecting with them.
You just gave me my niche. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And all of the meal prep companies, or that do like Good Eggs or any of those, that they also have websites that need someone to build them.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Greg, the other thing I'll add is every person has like 100 niches. Some of them you haven't actually connected the dots on. You might have like done some volunteering in the back in the day, like helping like maybe you're helping like a dog shelter. So you can spin that story of why you have a passion for animals and reach out to companies that have animal products or like sell animal products online. You know, you can tie your story to anything. It just takes a little bit of like thought and connecting the dots and spinning your story. But the more of these emails you send out, the easier it's going to become tying the story. Okay.
Thank you.
The other thing that you asked is like, how do you find the hiring managers, or who do you reach out to? Every single person should be on LinkedIn, right? They should be in the advanced search section where you could actually specify. You can specify the location. So you can say, I want to find people within 25 miles of Atlanta, right? And then you want to say, you want to specify the role. So you might say, I want to find software engineers, or like principal engineers. You might want to find senior engineers. So once you start playing around with that, you'll actually see a whole pool of like thousands of people in Atlanta that you can reach out to, and then just go one by one and start thinking, what do you have in common with those people? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Greg. We have about 5 minutes left. I actually have 2 questions. One of the questions came up in the chat, but some of the people, Tiffany, some of the people in our community, they're not out of college. They have kids. Some people have many kids. I think Greg has like 8 or 9 kids, and some people even have grandkids. So if you're career transitioning into tech, but you're not like in your 20s or 30s, what advice do you have for those people? Because I feel like for those people, even just like the thought of applying and getting rejected, it's hard overcoming those beliefs. So what advice do you have for them?
All right. So sometimes so first I would say remove from your resume 20 years of experience. And so what does that mean? You don't need to put every single piece of, or every piece of work you've ever done on your resume. In fact, I would like your resume to be 1 page long. And so obviously for some of our more experienced people out there, all of your work experience is not going to fit on a single page resume. And so instead, I would encourage everyone to think of resumes as the one pager that showcases the work that is most relevant to the type of job that you're going for. And so if there are gaps in your resume, so let's say you were taking the Greg, or I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but the woman who was in finance who is becoming a UI UX designer. So there can be gaps. I actually don't care about gaps, and I don't think most recruiters care about gaps as long as that comes with a compelling cover letter. But you highlight what's important. So to that lady, she will highlight some very relevant finance experience that ties back to what the current company, fintech company she's focused on does. And then she will also put on that her newer experience and the projects she has focusing on UI, UX related things. And I would say, in addition, having a single resume that you continually send out is probably not the best approach. Resumes can be tailored to the specific types of companies you are working with. And I would say, at minimum, have at least 3 different templates ready to go that are showcasing different things. Because we can tell when it's just a super generalistic cover letter as well as resume, and that shows like minimal effort. And I think a lot of my recruiting peers like to see a bit of tailored effort in the same way that you hope to see personalization in our interview process, and not just this generalistic transactional approach.
Thanks, Tiffany. What about the age? Like if someone is, let's say, 50 years old and they're deciding to career transition now, they go through a boot camp and they actually become a great React engineer. They have a portfolio of projects demonstrating apps that they've built, backends that they've built. Does that person still have a shot at getting a job on tech?
Yes, I would say so, because one of the biggest, criticisms for a lot of people in tech is that tech is immature, that tech has a bunch of 20-year-olds who don't know how to be professionals in an organization, which results in very interesting HR-related challenges. And while I think we glorify the youth piece in tech, having companies that are composed of all 20-year-olds does not make for successful organizations. And I think there's been a lot of news that shows that even if a company is successful, there are a lot of cultural problems at place. And I'll be upfront in saying that, yeah, not all companies are going to consider older folks. And simultaneously, they really should be, because having companies that are monocultures in terms of the decades of experience available is really limiting. I would, again, take the same discovery approach of looking through the employee on LinkedIn, or looking at the employee base of some of these companies to see what is the average age. Are there people who are in their 40s and 50s in these companies? And if not, and if so, that's probably a company you want to apply for. And then again, in your cover letter, to really spotlight the experience you bring and the maturity. And if you have managed teams before, I think that's important. Using the same example of my Jelly Belly friend. So yes, she started at the Jelly Belly as like webmaster or a junior webmaster or something like that. But she had a teaching background in yoga. And so while she is very clear, she is not like the best and most badass coder out there, she knows how to mentor her 20-year-old colleagues as a 45-year-old woman right now. And she knows how to grow people who may even be more technically competent than her. And so from that alone, she is now, fast forward about 10 years, she is a engineering manager in a 300-person organization, and they are fast tracking her towards the director level. And it's because of her work ethic, and it's also because of the fact that she knows how to manage people or mentor other people. And she's continually put in the role of being a mentor, even to people who are more senior than her, because technical skills is just one line of development, and there's emotional intelligence, there's social awareness, and all of these other lines of development and competencies that also matter in terms of being able to excel and evolve and grow within a company and level up.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for this great response. Just to add to what you just said, realize that there's thousands and thousands of companies out there. And so some of them might not want to hire you, but then you don't want to work there either. But there's a huge world of companies that need engineers, that need products that should have been shipped a month ago. And if you have the skills, you will find that company that will hire you, because you only need one job, right? And so keep on going, don't stop. I want to thank Tiffany again for taking the time and to join us and share so much great advice. I want to thank everyone from our community who keeps joining week after week, and they keep investing in themselves and their education. And we're just very excited for all of you to learn together, then build together. Eventually, just like Career Karma, you now know Tiffany, so you can reach out to her and maybe they can fund you too and your ideas. But Tiffany, for people who want to be in touch with you, what's the best way for them to connect?
I'll actually say either LinkedIn or Twitter works for me. Feel free to send me a personalized message. Make sure you tell me you're in this, because I don't respond to people who I don't know. But if you say you were part of this, I will respond. Granted, Christmas is around the corner, so I might not be as quick as I could be. The last thing oh no, I'm losing my thought. I had one final big takeaway that I wanted to share. It may come back to me, and I may interrupt you, Timur.
Tiffany, why don't we have you back? I know before this call, when Ruben and I were talking about imposter syndrome, and you actually, I think you were leading some workshops on imposter syndrome. We can definitely have you back in a few weeks or in 2020 and have you share your expertise and knowledge and advice on imposter syndrome as well.
I'd love to. That's a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because I still constantly feel like an imposter all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you again. Thank you so much for your work, for your time. Also, want to thank Kapor Capital for believing in Career Karma and believing in our mission to help everyone who's on the call today. So let's give Tiffany a big round of applause, and let's break in, everyone. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you guys all for being here with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And if I don't see you all on the next call next week, happy holidays. Have a great Christmas, Hanukkah, and 2020 is going to be a great decade.
Yes.
All right. We're all going to be building together. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Aisha, Craig, Raina, Tiffany, good night.
Good night.
Alicia, Mercedes, welcome to the community. Teddy, good night, everyone.
Thank you.